Hello there, hi there. Again, this is Clifford Bates. This is my. This is the fourth. Technically the fourth installment, but of my series on reading Machiavelli's Prince. Today we are doing chapter 3, which is chapter 3 is the mixed principate. Again, just to cover. Machiavelli's Prince has 26 chapters plus an epistle dedicatory. The 26th chapter and the epistle dedicatory are the frame of the book. The first chapters of 1 through 11 gives us a discussion of principalities. That's one part of the one thematic theme of the Prince. The second thematic theme is on chapters 12 through 14, which deals with the question of arms and the quiet nature of men. And then we get a discussion starting at chapter 15, going all the way to chapter 19, about the question of virtues. These are the specific virtues, the virtues and the connection between virtues and the Prince. And then the last, from chapter 20 to 25, we get a discussion about, basically this is the question, D'Alvarez, and I think D'Alvarez is right here, it's just prudence. In other words, we have all these, that we're testing the prudence of the reader. And it's always about the question of judgment, of the Prince's judgment, about what is the right course of action, and he gives a series of issues and problems that he deals with, and that he's addressed elsewhere, and then he's doing again. Now that's the overall structure. Now today we are dealing with the mixed principate. Now again, from this take us to chapter 1, which he said that what was the thrust of what's going on here, the weaving that's going to be done here, is that he says that of principates, right? They're either hereditary, in which the blood is of their lords, princely. That was chapter 2 of hereditary principates, right? Or they are new, right? And of the new, they're either all new, in the case of Forza, which is a new principate, and or else one that is acquired. Now, mixed principate is a case where we're going to be talking about. It's a principate which is neither new nor a wholly new or wholly old. Okay. So let's begin. This has 17 paragraphs. This is the first chapter of the Prince that is rather long. It has 17 paragraphs. Before up to this point, we had chapter 1 had only 1 paragraph, and chapter 2 had 3 paragraphs. Okay. Here we have 17 paragraphs. The first paragraph goes off, but the new principate is, so he starts out with the new principate, right? And he says, it's the one that presents all the difficulties. And first, if it's not all new, but is like a member, so that one can call the whole, which has been brought together, as it were, mixed. Its alteration arises from the beginning from a natural difficulty, which is to be found in all new principates, and that is that men willingly change masters, believing they will better themselves, and this belief makes them take up arms against them, whereby they deceive themselves. For they then experience that they have had the worst. Okay, now always the they means the people. Remember we talked about this before. The pronoun they, who's referring to, is normally here is often kind of referring to the they is the many. Okay, the people in question. So therefore, he says that they take up arms. This is what he says, this is a difficulty. The difficulty is they change their masters because they think it'll be better. The new master will be better. A new thing will be better. But they deceive themselves, for they experience, they have had the worst, right? They experience that the new thing situation ends up being worse. That follows from another natural and ordinary necessity. Okay? So the first thing is what? There's a natural difficulty. which is that all new principates, that men willingly change masters, believing that this new master will be better, but what ends up happening is they get the work, they end up not getting the better of the situation. Okay, that's one. They get and they actually think the other master were better. They get buyer remorse, right? They get buyer remorse. Now the second thing is what follows is from a natural and ordinary necessity. Okay, this is the next sentence. And after that, this is page 11 of the Alvarez translation. Comma, so an ordinary necessity, comma. That is and that is that he needs must always hurt those who new prince he becomes, and hurt them with men-at-arms, soldiers, and with infinite other injuries that the new acquisition drags along with it. So in other words, he says, if you're going to acquire something, you're taking over, and they were used to be ruled by someone else, they kind of welcome you, because they didn't like the other guy. The other guy, for some reason, they were unhappy with, and they said maybe you'd be better. But what happens is what happens is buyer remorse. The second thing, this is the other problem. Once you take over a place, anytime you take over a new place, you're going to have to what? As he says. This is why it's important. He says, it follows from another natural and ordinary necessity, that he who must always hurt those whose new prince he becomes. In other words, the first thing I do as a new prince, I'm going to have to what? Impose armies, bring soldiers, impose orders, do things to make my rule work, and that's going to always harm the people I've just taken over somehow. Particularly maybe even the ones that brought me in the first place. Okay? So therefore, this is the problem. Therefore, the buyer remorse and the fact that any new ruler who takes over something new is going to have a problem of ordering and establishing his rule or her rule. And then this leads us to the next sentence there, right in the middle of that page 11. The next sentence is, in this mode you have as enemies all those whom you have hurt in the seizing of that principate, semicolon, and you are not able to maintain as friends those who placed you there, being unable to satisfy them in the mode they have expected, and by your not being able to use strong medicines against them, being obligated to them. For even if one has the most powerful armies, one always needs the favor of the new inhabitants of a province to enter it. Okay, so he starts at a very interesting point. He says, even if you have the strongest army, you need to have willing supporters. In other words, if you're going to take over a province or take over an area, if you don't have somebody in there that welcomes you, it makes it more difficult for you. But the problem is, the minute they let you in, they help you get in, and you win, they're going to have a problem. They're going to be, first of all, the people you remove, the people you took the plague from, they're your enemies. They're never going to want to work with you. And in other words, you moved them off, right? So therefore, the first problem is, you have as enemies all those whom you've hurt in seizing the principate. So everyone that you've hurt seizing the principate, they're going to be your enemies. And the people who are your friends, well, the problem with them is what? That they will want you to do things that you're not able to do for them, and they get resentful. And because you need them, you can't use what he says, strong medicines. This metaphor, this is the term. Strong medicines means killing people, doing the things necessary in order to maintain control. The strong medicines, you cannot use the strong medicines against those who are your allies. It doesn't look good. It's necessary, and because of that, and being obligated to them, You were obligated to them, right? This idea, the sense that you're obligated to them, you can't do that. So therefore, you don't use strong medicines against them in that sense. You can't. It doesn't say not being able to. It's not that you can't. You're not able to use them, probably because you feel obligated to them, right? Against them being obligated to them, for they helped you come, right? But the problem is that this is going to be a problem. You can't. In other words, you can't satisfy those who helped you. Those who helped you get in. You're not going to be able to satisfy them because they're going to want you to do things that you can't do. And those who you've taken hurt to get it are going to hate you. They're going to see you as the enemy. Now, he continues this paragraph here. For these causes, Louis XII, King of France, quickly seized and quickly lost Milan. And Ludovico's own forces, for the first time that France lost Milan, were enough to take it from him. Now, again, this echoes very much the discussion of, remember the first discussion of the hereditary prince being able to get it back on the first occasion, right? In other words, the Duke of Milan was able to get it back very quickly. In fact, what's so interesting here, D'Albres makes a point, in the first paragraph, the switch of the two. This is footnote 3 or footnote 2. Wait, get this. This is footnote 3 on the first paragraph. The two. This is the first time Machiavelli just addresses the prince with the familiarity as an equal. Okay. In other words, we have moved far from the low place Machiavelli occupied in the Epistle Dedicatory. In other words, Machiavelli's use of the courteous second person, again, see page 19 of note 19 here. And note 19 is, again, he uses the word verede. Mac uses the courteous form of the second person. Now, this is interesting. In other words, every time, D'Albres will mark every time a note will be made whenever the familiar or courteous you is being used. So that's very important, and pay attention to the you. How is Machiavelli using the you when he refers to here? And this is going to be something you should pay attention. To what degree is Machiavelli talking to him as respected someone like this, trying to gain support, versus an equal, someone who's on the equal par with, and someone he's on the equal par with trying to do this. And now let's get back to that last paragraph, right? He loses Milan, and though it was, in other words, own forces for the first time lost Milan, were enough to take it back from him, semicolon. Because these people who had opened the gates to him, finding themselves deceived in their opinions of the future good which they had expected, could not put up with the annoyance of having a new prince. So in other words, they expected much. He started imposing on them, so they rebelled and returned back to Ludovico. Okay. This is the second paragraph now. It is very true that when countries have rebelled and are acquired for the second time, they are lost with more difficulty. For the ruler, taking the occasion of their rebellion, has less concern for them and secures himself by punishing delinquents, exposing subjects, providing for himself where he's the weakest. Okay. In other words, the first time you come in, you gotta, you can't be too harsh on those who helped you, even if they become a pain in the ass or they become an obstacle to you. You can't give them what they want; they resent it, and then they kick you out. But you come back, you reacquire it. This time, you are doing what? You're not going to be as nice as you were before. You're going to, how do they say? You're going to less concern for them. You're not going to be concerned for the people who helped you. You're going to just, if they're useful and they're good, they get rewarded. If they're not useful and they're bothersome, you remove them and put people who are going to be loyal to you. Right? That's the kind of thing. exposing subjects. That means, exposing. It means putting them on the stake on a tree out there. Does expose. In other words, the subjects who are not willing and not compliant, you kind of crucify them, or put them on someplace that's going to be expose them. That's what they mean, exposing. The idea of putting them on outside, tying them on stock, or putting them on the stocks, or putting them on someplace where they have to be exposed to the forces of nature, right? Punishing delinquents. Secures himself by punishing delinquents, exposing subjects, and providing for himself where he's the weakest. In this mode, to have the King of France lose Milan the first time, it was enough for Duke Ludovico to make a noise on her confines. But to have him lose it the second time, in other words, the King of France will lose Milan again, it was needful for all the world come against him, for all the world to come against him, and that his armies be extinguished or driven out of Italy. This arises from the cause mentioned above. Nevertheless, the first and second times it was taken from him. So it was taken. The first time it was only a minor thing. Again, a hereditary ruler, someone like this, who someone replaced him, usurped it, and then what happened? It said in Book 1, it says that it's an ordinary thing, any occasion. So he turned. This time he was more ruthless, and as he was more ruthless, what happened? It required the whole world to come against him. And the world did come against him, and he lost it. Now, the third paragraph it's basically one sentence. It has clauses, so I will do it. The general cause for the first loss have already been discussed. In other words, that's the discussion in Hereditary Principates about again, that's why it's discussed there. That, again, go read that again. It remains now to state those of the second, and to see what remedies there are for the king, and what are for someone who might be in the same situation as he, so that he may better maintain himself in the acquisition than France did, than the King of France did. I say now this is paragraph 4. I say therefore that those states which are acquired, if annexed to the same state anciently held of him who acquired them, are either of the same province and of the same language, or they're not. First period. This means what? On a province or an area, the question is, are they of the same, in other words, are the people you're acquiring, do they share the same language or not? Okay? First question. The thing you're acquiring or the thing you're annexing, do they share the same language? First thing. Okay, that's first sentence, period. Next, when they have the same language, then it's very easy to hold them, and especially so when they are not used to living free, and to possess them securely. It is enough to have extinguished the line of the prince who ruled over them, because though other things, if former conditions are maintained, and there are no differences in customs, men live quietly, as one sees in Burgundy, Brittany, Gascony, and Normandy have done, for which have for so long been with France. And although there are some differences in language, nevertheless their customs are similar, and they have been able easily to comport one with the other. So, in other words, he's saying that language is the similarity between language, customs, and laws, right? That they're going to be similar. In other words, that the example he gives us of the territories of Burgundy, Brittany, Gascony, and Normandy in France, that they have been part of France. They have the same customs. Their language is basically the same. There's some differences, but their customs are similar enough, and they've been able to comport with each other for a long time, right? That is important there. So therefore, as long as the ruler Remember, he takes it over. If they're the same language, the thing you need to do is exterminate. Literally, he says, exterminate the line of the prince. He says if they're not used to being free, if they're used to living under the prince, if this population is used to be living under the prince, then the thing you need to do is extinguish the line of the princes who ruled over them. Because if one exists, they're going to go back to that person. So therefore, no, exterminate them all. Kill them all. Make sure they're gone. Because once they're gone, as long as you don't touch the rules, the laws, and the language, your rule is safe. They'll be happy. They'll be content. They won't necessarily rebel. And he continues, and he who acquires them, wishing to keep them, ought to have two concerns: that the one of the blood of their ancestors, that the blood of their ancient princes be extinguished, and the other that neither their laws nor their taxes be altered, so that in a very short time it becomes all one body with the ancient principate. In other words, so therefore these connections are similar, the same language. They're simply like this. You share the same language and same customs, and usually therefore the laws and also because the laws and language are similar, the laws will probably be similar. So that's just when you take them over, you kill the line of the princes, and then two, you do what? You don't touch their laws or their taxes. Don't touch their taxes. In other words, the taxes that their prince used to take, you now take it. Don't make more. Don't try to change anything. Just, you're now in charge. You're now the replaced the thing. Now, I think this is the fifth paragraph now. Let me go take my battered copy that I finally brought with me today. The fifth paragraph. And the fifth paragraph, it goes very straightforward. And that is, but when one acquires states in a province which is different from one's own language, customs and orders, in other words, there are also different customs and orders, here are to be found difficulties. And here is the need for great fortune and great industry to hold them. In other words, once you go into a place that has different languages, different customs, and different habits, orders, in other words, they're different than your rule. Here, this is going to be difficult. You're going to need what? Great fortune and great industry to hold them. And one of the greatest and quickest, most effective remedies would be that the person who is to acquire them go live there. In other words, the quickest and easiest thing is go live there. You acquire it, you go live there. In other words, you conquer a new place, you go live in the new place. This is what the Duke of Normandy did when the Duke of Normandy conquered England. He went to live in England. Again, he'll give him more examples. He goes, this would have made the possession more secure and more lasting, as the Turk had done in Greece. And if he had not gone there to live, it would not have been possible to hold it, despite all the other orders observed by him to maintain that state. Now he means this: the capture of Constantinople. If the Turk, the great Turk, the great Muslim leader, when he conquers Istanbul, conquers Greece, Constantinople, if he did not go live in Constantinople, he would not have been able to maintain it. Machiavelli hits. Now he goes there. He goes to maintain that state. For being there, they themselves see the disorder as they. In other words, once they're there, they, and this is interesting. The they, because being the many, the many, it's rather now the princes. This is interesting. The pronoun usages here is very interesting. He switches earlier. The they is the many, and now here this is the they is referring to the Turkish rulers. They're able to see as they are the disorders, right? And they are able to quickly remedy them. Now, the first they is the disorders, but now the second they here is the prince who is able to quickly remedy them. But not being there, they hear them only when they become great and when there is no more remedy. In other words, being far away, being like this, the ruler far away, and by the time they hear the problems, there's no able to remedy the problem. So therefore, being close, being there, they can see the problems as they arise and then remedy them as quickly as possible. So therefore, that's why it's important to go live there, in his argument, the example of the Turk. Moreover, the province is not despoiled by your officials. In other words, your officials don't despoil the place. You're there, you're running it, and then you're making sure that your officials aren't robbing the place blind. The subjects are satisfied by the nearness or the near recourse to the prince, whereupon they have more cause to love him, wishing to be good and wishing to otherwise to fear him. So they love him because they think he's going to do good, or if they don't love him, they fear him. Okay. In the last sentence here of this paragraph, and if any of the powers external to that province would want to assault his state, they would have to greater respect, so that living there he can lose it only with the greatest difficulty. So if he's there, the opponents who might want to take it would have to be more careful. And it'll be very, and all these things he's said so far allows him to keep control over the principate. Now he goes, the other best, this is now the sixth paragraph, and he goes, the other best remedy, now this is weird, the other best remedy, Alvarez has a good note here, number 9. There are two best remedies. To go live there, to go there and live, or to send colonies. Machiavelli perhaps considers colonies to be more practicable, but of all the remedies, these two are the best. Which one is to be adopted clearly depends on the circumstance of the prince. So that's what the Alvarez points out, and this is the point about this line here. On page 13, we come to the other difficulty. The other best remedy is to send colonies to one or two places which, as it were, shackles on that state. For it is necessary either to do this or to have men in arms and infantry there. On the colonies not much is spent, and without any or little spending he can send and keep, and he hurts only those whose fields and houses he's taken and are given to the new inhabitants, and the former are but a small part of that state, and those whom he hurts remaining dispersed and poor can never injure him. So the people you're going to move people there. So therefore, whoever you take to bring in there, people loyalty to you, your colonists, you need to do what? Those you have to disperse them and keep them poor, not allow them to get to use their resentment and their thing to get powerful, or to or harm you. So they can never injure you. All the others have, on the other hand, no hurt given them. Because of this, they should remain quiet. And on the other hand, they will be afraid of making a mistake, for fear what happened to those who would have just been despoiled might happen to them. In other words, you've just despoiled a whole bunch. You've taken the property and you just destroyed and dispersed them and made them powerless and weak. The other people will look at that and say, "Oh, I don't want that to happen to me. I better be good." And they don't want to have it happen, so they will continue that. It might happen to them. Next sentence of this same paragraph, he continues, this is page 14. I conclude that such colonies do not cost anything, are more faithful, hurt less, and those who are hurt cannot do injury, being poor and dispersed, as I have said, period. For this to be noted, that one has either to caress men or extinguish them. For if they can take revenge for light offenses, they cannot do so for grave ones. They cannot do so for grave ones. Semicolon. Now this is important. You have to either this is great. This is one of his. This is the typical great Machiavellian kind of rule. Here's a general rule. For what is noted, as one can either caress men or extinguish them. For if they can take revenge for light offenses, they cannot do so for grave ones. And if one has to do hurt to men, it should be in such a mode that there is no fear of vengeance. If you're going to do harm to people, if you're going to hurt them, you better make sure there's no fear of retaliation or vengeance. So therefore, you have to caress or extinguish. Caress or extinguish, because if men can take vengeance for light offenses, they better not do for big offenses, and therefore, if you're going to have to rely on them, you better be careful, because you have to be in such a mode that they would rather in other words, there is no fear of vengeance. If you're going to have to hurt men, you better make sure that there's not going to be vengeance done by the people, other people. So you have to be careful here. You have to make sure of the case. This is why you'll talk about this later. But in having men at arms there instead of colonies, one spends much more. In other words, when having troops, you have to occupy the place by occupation military troops, like the Americans did in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's not that we wanted it. It's like we wanted to keep control, possession forever. But keeping U.S. soldiers there was a very expensive thing. And it wasn't really doing what it was helping to do, right? So therefore, keeping it men of arms instead of colonies, one spends much more having to consume the garrison and all income of that state, and in such a mode. In other words, this is the difference. America had spent its own money, not spending the Iraq money. So we weren't occupying it. That's the difference. If we were occupying it, we would not have spent U.S. taxpayers' money. We would have used the money from Iraq to pay for the occupation. We didn't do that. That's not because we're not there to conquer or make Iraq part of the United States or under our control. It was there. Why? Because we wanted to get rid of that. It was for kind of do-gooding. This idea that we wanted to bring democracy to Iraq, or to ensure that the Iraqis are not going to be governed by someone who's our enemy. We want to put a friend in charge. The problem is that we didn't do it. We didn't put a friend in charge. We're going to nation build. Well, okay, yeah. But I hate to say it, nation building is a very messy, nasty thing, and we don't have the stomach for it. So therefore, we shouldn't do it. Nation building is kind of like what Machiavelli is going to be talking about. You have to kill a lot of people. You're going to have to do a lot of things that you're not necessarily a democratic society is not going to be comfortable with. Building a nation that then, these are still, Iraq and these places are still not really societies in our common sense, a European sense. They don't have in other words, they are still mostly tribal societies. They may have agricultural aspects, but they're still mostly tribal societies who don't really have a modern unity. In other words, the political entity the nation is called is a byproduct of imperial rule. The post of the collapsing empire of the Ottomans and the imposition of territorial disputes between the French and the British after the chopping up of the Ottoman kingdoms. In other words, Syria, Iraq, and all these places are kind of artificial constructs. So there's no real natural society there. The tribal people there are there, and that even after so many years, there's still not a natural. There are certain ethnic groups and tribes and people, and there's a ruling tribe, a dominate tribe. See, this is the problem of much of post-imperial 19th century imperialism, second half 19th century imperialism, because often the imperial power and the way they designed it often incorporated populations that had nothing in common with each other. It had no political heritage outside of the colonial ruler. And therefore, when the transition of state comes up, in other words, the new state emerges with a transition of this party. And that's a problem. And that's a problem because this is a case of what the mixed principate is in a very much a way. That there's a serving problem here. Now, he says, it's going to hurt this things very much to keep your armies there, right? And this, I'll continue, is having to consuming garrisons all the income of that state in such a mode that acquisition turns into a loss. And he hurts many more by having continued to change the quarters of his army, which therefore injures all the state. Everyone feels the hardship and everyone becomes his enemy. And they are enemies who can do him injury because, although beaten, they remain in their own homes. Hence, in every way, this remedy of a garrison is as useless as colonies is useful. Now we get to the seventh paragraph. He who is of the different province, he who is of a different province from his own, and has been said ought to have become the leader and the defender of the neighboring lesser province, to contrive to weaken the powerful of that different province, and prevent that by some accident there should enter a foreigner more powerful than he. Now it will always come about that he will be brought in by those who from either too much ambition or fear are malcontents, as happened formerly when the Otians brought in the Romans into Greece, and in every other province that the latter entered, they were all, brought in by the provincials. In other words, Romans often were brought in by local the very provincials against other parties. So therefore, this is a very important case. In other words, the malcontents. What the danger here is what? Someone brings a powerful foreigner in to kind of contrast you, right? And therefore, okay, this is a different thing. In other words, they do so why? They do sort of fear, ambition or fear. And they're malcontents. These are malcontents. Now, what's happening, he says here. And the order of these things is such that as soon as a powerful foreigner appears in a province, all the less powerful therein adhere to him, moved by the envy they have against him who held power over them. In other words, the new foreigner comes in. All those, all of a sudden, that had envy of the person ruling them, didn't like him, go now to the new foreigner, right? Okay, that's such that with respect to the weaker powers, he does not have to endure any toil to gain them, because they immediately and willingly make themselves wholly one with the state that he's acquired there. So it's not, if you're a foreigner coming into the thing, who's going to come to you? It's going to be the weaker people, the outsiders, those who were kept on the outs in the previous order. I'm a new guy coming in. I'm going to come into this province, and what's going to happen? Everyone who's on the outs who is on the losers and the people who lack power and the weaker people, the weaker party in the system, who out of envy and malcontent of the city will side with me, side with the newcomer, the new guy coming in here. I don't have to win them. They're going to be on my side. He only has to think about how they should not have too much force and too much authority. I just have to make sure they don't have those malcontents and these people who are now on my side. They better not have too much force and they better not have too much authority. And he can, with his forces in their favor, easily put down those who are powerful. So he remains in all things the arbiter of that province. So I'm going to be the arbiter of that province. In other words, everyone's going to come to me. No one else is going to be more powerful than me. Anyone who tries to be more powerful than me, in that sense, the prince who's taking over, I'm a foreigner. The outsiders are going to look at me as like this, and I just have to make sure there's no one more powerful than me, and I just knock them down. So and therefore this outsider, become the arbiter of the rule of this situation, of this province. And he who does not manage this part well will quickly lose what he has acquired. And while he holds it, he will have infinite difficulties and vexations in it. In other words, if you're not doing this right, if you're trying to, let's say this, you over-empower the new people who joined you. All these malcontents and all these people who sided with you against the old order. You can't give them too much. If you give them too much, you give them too much power, too much authority, then what you need to be is the arbiter. You need to be the balance. So therefore, you can't let them get too powerful. You can't let them get too much control and too vengeance on the society. You got to make sure they're your side, because if you're not there, the people who used to abuse them and that dominate them, whether they were the weaker force, will be back in power, and they might now remember the fact that they were against them. Okay, so therefore, if you go, they're fucked. Okay, so therefore, okay, you just need to make sure that you keep these guys controlled. They cannot have too much power, and they cannot do too much harm on the other people. They can't take too much. They can't destabilize the thing. And also, the forces that you've taken power from, you gotta knock them off. You gotta make sure that they don't have any power. You can't kill them all necessarily, but you can make sure they don't have power. They're weaker than you, and they're fearing you. Okay, and therefore you maintain. You have to balance this. You have to become the arbiter. You have to become the person who determines who benefits and who doesn't. Therefore, you don't want to give the people who you've helped, because these people are going to resent them no matter what. So you need to balance it. And remember, he said this is the problem that's always there. The new prince always hurts those whom he ends up brought him in. So you have to pay attention here. And if you're not, and this is why you have to be careful about men of arms. This is why it's go live there. Colonies, don't bother with men of arms. Occupation armies or things like that is going to be disaster. Now he does this thing at the 8th paragraph. He gives us an example of the Romans. Examples. The Romans in their province they took observed all these matters. They sent colonies, kept and provided for the less powerful without increasing their power, and put down the powers, and never let powerful foreigners gain a reputation. This example, you have to be careful. If a foreigner comes in, a reputation comes in, that can become a competitor to you. Okay, so therefore you have to be careful. Don't let a foreigner become too powerful in this situation. Gain a reputation. And I wish the province of Greece to suffice as the only example of that point, he says. The Achaeans and the Etosians were kept and provided for by them. The kingdom of Macedonia was put down. Etosius was driven out. Nor did the merits of the Achaeans nor those of the Eretrians ever make them permit any of these to increase their state. nor did Philip persuasion ever induce them to be friendly to him without first putting him down, nor could the power of Antichris make them consent that he should hold any state in that he is Philip in that province. For the Romans in these cases the Romans, and this is the Republic, in all these cases did all that a wise princes ought to do, which is to have regard not only for the present disorder, but also for future ones, and all industry to anticipate and provide for them, because when one foresees them from afar, one can remedy them. But if you wait until they are near, the medicine is not in time and the malady is incurable. Okay? So therefore, this is the thing about this. So therefore, what is this? That the present disorders, in other words, have regard not only for present disorders but future ones, with all industry, to anticipate and provide for them. Treat them as though, in other words, the disorder is like what? It's like, okay, seeing a disorder is like an illness. You can see the illness ahead at a time. You can get the medicine ready and treat it quickly. Otherwise, if you catch it too late, you can't. The medicine won't. It's too late, and the medicine won't. It becomes incurable. Okay, so you have to act quickly, foresee the problems, and get them first. Now, this is where he gives the famous. This is chapter 9, paragraph 9. Sorry, not chapter 9. Paragraph 9, and this is at the end of page 15 and going on to page 16. He goes, and it comes to this. As this is, he now gives an argument for an analogy here. He says, as the physicians say of fever. He just began the discussion of how disorders are like illnesses, right? He's now giving. He's going to give saying that as physicians say of fever, consumptive fevers, right? That in the beginning of one's illness is easy to cure but difficult to know. But the medication not having been known in the beginning, with the progress of time, the fevers become easy to know but difficult to cure. Okay, so this is what he says, that the consumption fever sometimes it's difficult to catch them early, but what they caught early, very little necessary to fix them. But when you don't catch them early, you have to use very violent cures to do this. In fact, this is note 15. In other words, it's consumptive fevers or tubercular fevers. These are the kind of very nasty fevers that it's easy to cure them, and they're very easy. But if they're not caught early, the amount of effort you need to do, it requires a lot of effort, and it can kill the patient. So he says, difficult to cure. Thus it happens also in the things of state. For when one knows from afar, but which is given only to the prudent one, the ills that are being borne, they are cured easily. But when they are not having been known, they are left to grow in such a mode that everyone knows them. There is no remedy. In other words, it becomes, in other words, the ruler, this is where prudence matters. Prudence is having the knowledge of what is right and the knowledge of what is the ability to see what should be done. First of all, what's wrong, who's to blame, and exactly what's wrong, not just generally what's wrong, but knowing exactly what's wrong and knowing which is the best way to address it, and being able to know what tools best to do it, and know how to do it in a way that will best achieve your results. Okay, prudence is this classical virtue of this. Machiavelli turns prudence into kind of more tactical thing than the classics. And therefore, this is the example. Prudence is like the doctor knowing when to, being able to see the disease early, and being able to cure it the best. The prudent statesman, the prudent statesman, or the prudent prince, is the one who can see the disorder and know the cure and use the cure that will prevent the cure from getting bad. Because if it's when it's obvious, when everything is obvious, the problem is when it becomes really obvious, it's too late, and you often have to use very drastic measures that often kill the patient. Okay, so therefore, like think about this: how we cure cancer. We have to use chemo, right? Chemo is designed to we bombard the body with radiation, hoping that this will kill the cancer. Usually, it actually makes the body weaker, and sometimes it mostly kills the patient, right? Again, that's why we're taken here. Now, page 16. We're now at the. I think that is our 10th. Yeah, this is the 10th paragraph. But when the Romans, seeing from afar the inconvenience, always remedied them, and they never let them follow in order to avoid a war, because they knew that war is not to be avoided, but only to defer to the advantage of the other. In other words, this is a very important point. The Roman example is that war is not to be avoided for all costs. You should only avoid war so that you can wait till you get that you get the advantage. In other words, if I can avoid the war, so I can avoid fighting, not so that to prevent war, but I prevent fighting so because right now I would lose. That is the only reason why you avoid war, because you cannot win now. So I avoid war, but I'm going to prepare myself so when the war comes, I can act and I can win. In other words, this is the point. You should know when you can win. And I goes that war is not avoided, but only deferred to the advantage of others. Therefore, they wished rather to make war with Philip and Antonius in Greece, so that it should not have to be waged with them in Italy. And though they were able at the moment to avoid both the one and the other, they did not want to do so. Nor did they want, nor did that which is ordinary in the mouth of the wise our time, to enjoy the benefit of the time and ever please them. In other words, we should enjoy the benefit of the time, enjoy the peace, enjoy the thing. No. Ever please them. But they chose rather to take such benefit as came from their virtue and their prudence. For time drives forward everything, and can bring along with it good as well as the bad, and the bad as well as the good. So what is he saying here? Time comes along. Time drags whatever comes along with it. Time just moves forward. So time can this idea that you can wait to get something better. You can't avoid some decisions, and therefore the question is, why should you avoid something? Or not? Why should you wait? You should wait so that you can avoid it, so you can just hope that things are better in the future. No, you avoid it because you can't win now, and therefore you're going to wait until you're going to do something so that you can. Get a situation where you're better off. Like the example here is that they'd rather have fought Philip and Antonius in Greece rather than in Italy. Those two are going to probably go attack at Rome, and they'd rather do it and fight them in Greece than in Italy. It's more prudential. Now he didn't do that in that sense, but that's neither here nor there because they were able to, in other words, they. A moment to avoid both the one and the other, they did not want to do so. In other words, circumstances led them not doing neither. They wanted to get rid of what they did not want either one of those two imposing their will on Rome. Okay, so therefore they needed to deal with both of these things. Both of these powers were people who were going to be competitors for their control in Greece. So therefore, we need to do this. Therefore, the Romans always understood that they need to take care of the problem. In other words, they know that these two are going to be problems. So it's better to take care of them there rather than in Greece, rather than later in Rome. But right now, we can't do that because they're not ready. So we have to find a way to kind of remedy this without necessarily doing it right now. But we don't avoid it. In other words, we try to get the best out of the situation. We try to make it so that the worst case situation does not happen. So therefore, we don't try to avoid war for avoiding war. We only avoid war. If you avoid a war, particularly in a case where there's going to be conflict like this, when the parties are going to eventually, because they don't like the idea. Remember, Greece was brought in because of other people. Rome was brought into Greece because of other countries, and the parties are fighting with each other, and therefore the Romans are kind of helping and getting power. They're getting control over things. And what happens is, oh my God, the Romans have control over many of the Greek states. Now, rising political leaders challenging Roman control. What ends up happening is Rome needs to prevent that. If they win, they'll go wage their war in Italy. They don't want that, so they'd rather wage the war in Greece. But at the same time, they'd rather do what? Find a solution that can do this. How you can do that? You can keep these two fighting against each other. You can do many things. In other words, they would always prefer their virtue and their prudence. In other words, this is what he says here. Never to merely enjoy the time, but rather to take, instead of taking, in other words, not to enjoy benefits of time. In other words, just don't rely on the benefits that the moment gives you. Rather, make your benefits. Make it from your prudence and your virtue. Because time, as he says, drives forward everything. Both good things and bad things. Now, in the next paragraph, on chapter 14, is it 14? No, sorry, 11. Paragraph 11, sorry. I say 14, 11. But let us turn to France and examine if he did any one of these things said. And I shall speak of Louis, not of Charles, because he had longer possession of Italy. His progresses